more on all of this, we can bring in our foreign affairs commentator, Douglas Herbert. Doug, great to see you. It seems that Donald Trump, for once, seems to be paving the way for the EU, not standing in its way.
Not standing in the way is perhaps a better way of putting it. Paving the way might be going too far. Look, yeah, there is a big collective sigh of relief in the EU today as they gather in Brussels, all these heads of states, because at least for now, we don't know what's going to happen the next hour, the next day, whatever. At least for now, Trump is slightly more on the same page as Europe when it comes to, yes, these sanctions, and also having canceled this planned touted summit with Putin, calling it off. So as of today, Trump's greater exasperation with Putin, his canceling of the summit, his imposing of sanctions, and I will note that the U.S. is now, this is the first time the United States has slapped sanctions on Russia since Donald Trump returned to the White House in January. All of this is in favor of the EU as it looks at its own package, its 19th package of sanctions aimed at Russia, sanctions that will target the energy, the financial sectors, so on and so forth. Just let you, how has it? You said pave the way. One thing that these sanctions are doing, the U.S. sanctions, is they've targeted not just any company, not just any individual. It targeted the two biggest oil companies in Russia, Rosneft, Lukoil, companies over which that Putin, early in his term in power over the past quarter century, consolidated, put his own people in it. They're his beasts, in a sense. They account for, to give you a sense of how big they are and important they are to Russia, they account for about half, nearly half of all of its crude oil exports, just these two companies. And Russia's taxes, the energy budget is about a quarter. Taxes from the energy budget and energy companies are about a quarter of Russia's overall budget. So when Trump says that this will hurt Putin's ability, that is the sanctions on its two biggest oil companies, when the Trump administration says it will hurt or hamper Putin's war machine, his ability to fund the war, it's not a moot point. That said, as you pointed out, yes, they've gotten around it before. But one thing I will note that's interesting here, it's not just targeting those banks. The U.S. sanctions, and here's where the EU is probably taking notice, it also targets companies and individuals that do business with these banks. So not just the assets in the U.S., but anyone who does business with them. And here's where it gets interesting. It also threatens to go after and sanction banks, financial institutions that help process the transactions. So banks in India, banks in China, banks in Turkey are now potentially on the bad side of the United States sanctions regime if they help Russia by taking Russian oil and then helping those transactions with the refineries in those countries. It's a big deal. If that could actually bite, if the other countries, the problem lies in, and it's always this when we talk about sanctions, enforcement. How strict? How studious will be the U.S. enforcement of what it says it is going to do with these sanctions?
Doug, when Russia invaded Ukraine, in that first few days, we had all these countries, the EU, the US, slap all these sanctions on Russia with the intention of influencing Russia's thinking, Putin's thinking. Now the EU has the 19th round, and we still haven't managed to influence.
Look at a 20th next.
We still haven't. So it begs the question, do sanctions even work?
Yeah, look, I'll sit on the fence a little bit because there really are two solidly different schools of thought here. One school is sort of the realpolitik. You look at the actual effects sanctions have had, at least visibly to the naked eye. You go to Russia, you travel through Russia, you go into stores, you still actually see Western products on a lot of store shelves. You're like, how's that possible? Isn't everything under sanction? Russia finds ways to get, if you have money in Russia, you could essentially get almost anything, right? And there are Russian companies that are still, Western companies still operating there. Auchan, the French company, being one of them. So they have circumvented is the word. Putin has become a master at circumventing sanctions. We've seen it with his shadow oil fleets that have been stopped in recent weeks by European tankers. But we've also seen it generally in many Russians who don't really notice a real impact in terms of what they can buy. But like I said, where it can ultimately hit, the propaganda, the state-run propaganda could deny it or cover it up or try to conceal it as much as they want. It ultimately has to take a hit if, given the fact that energy, especially natural gas, oil, are the drivers, overwhelming drivers of the Russian economy. They're not as a diversified economy. They rely on their hydro fossils, on these types of energy energy resources. If those are hampered in any way from doing business, and these sanctions, whether they want to deny it or not, hamper the business, it could have an impact. But I go back to what I said earlier. It also will a big a role in and determinant in whether or not these sanctions are effective, both European and U.S., is in whether the countries that are enabling Russia by buying its energy resources, by buying its oil, the Russia, the India, the China, Narendra Modi, will Narendra Modi in his country, will companies now exit their contracts? Maybe they felt like they can't exit contracts with Russia, but now maybe they'll feel like they have an exit ramp given to them by Donald Trump, right? Given to them, hey, we'd love to keep buying your oil, Vladimir Putin. Narendra Modi could say, we just can't. It's illegal now. The U.S. now is going to slap these horrible punitive tariffs. We can't afford it anymore.
And if those individuals get targeted, especially those who have their kids studying in the U.S., for instance, so I think people will be complying with this.
But for now, Putin, I will end with the notion that if you ask me whether sanctions are effective from the standpoint of Vladimir Putin, he will say no, and he has proven through his actions that he is determined as ever, hunkered down as ever, digging in his heels on this war. He is scoffing at the sanctions, and he says, at least publicly, there is no way, no how these are going to have any impact on my behavior and my determination to address the root causes of this conflict and to end this war on my terms.
We'll see what happens. Thank you very much for that, Douglas Herbert there.